I was jolted from a deep sleep by the thunderous sound of machinery outside my window. My first thought was that roadwork had started early, but as I groggily checked my phone 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, I realized something was very wrong. The noise was coming from my property, not the street. I threw on a pair of jeans and rushed downstairs, nearly tripping over my boots in the hallway. When I burst through my back door, what I saw made my blood run cold. A yellow excavator was tearing into my detached garage, its metal claw ripping through the custom cedar siding I had installed just last summer. Behind the controls sat a man in a hard hat, methodically destroying the structure I had spent years perfecting. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed, running across my dew-soaked lawn in bare feet. "Stop that right now!" The operator didn't seem to hear me over the engine, or maybe he was ignoring me. Standing near my fence line was a middle-aged woman with a platinum blonde bob and sunglasses perched on her head. She wore khaki pants and a navy blazer despite the early hour, clipboard in hand, watching the destruction with what I could only describe as satisfaction. "Miss Patterson," I yelled, recognizing the Homeowners Association president even in my sleep-deprived state. "What is happening here?" "That's my garage." Patricia Patterson turned to me with a look of practiced indifference. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman. We're carrying out an enforcement action approved by the board." "Enforcement for what?" I was shaking now, partly from the morning chill on my bare chest, but mostly from rage. "You can't just tear down someone's property." She held up her clipboard. "We absolutely can, Lawrence. You've been in violation of HOA bylaws section 17.3 regarding exterior structures for over 9 months. You were sent multiple notices." I ran my hand through my hair in disbelief. "I appealed those notices. The hearing was scheduled for next week." By now, the excavator had torn through an entire wall, revealing the gleaming chrome and painted bodies of my motorcycle collection. 6 bikes my pride and joy were now exposed to the elements and in immediate danger. My limited edition Harley-Davidson, a restored 1978 Honda CB 750, my Ducati Panigale, and 3 other vintage motorcycles that I had spent years collecting and restoring. "Stop the demolition now," I screamed, waving my arms frantically at the operator. The man finally noticed me and paused, looking toward Patricia for direction. She simply nodded for him to continue. "Those are collector motorcycles worth over $100,000. I was practically hyperventilating. "If one scratch gets on them, you should have thought about that before ignoring our regulations, Mr. Coleman," Patricia said with infuriating calmness. "Your garage exceeds the height restriction by 14 inches, and you failed to get approval for the exterior material." "We've been more than patient." I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. "I'm calling the police. This is illegal." Patricia looked unconcerned. "We have legal authority under our covenants. Check your homeowner agreement." While waiting for the police to arrive, I watched in horror as the excavator continued dismantling my garage piece by piece. The operator was now working around the motorcycles, but debris was falling dangerously close to them. I could see chips of wood and nails raining down on the custom paint job of my Harley. "If you damage those bikes, I'll sue every single one of you," I warned, my voice cracking with emotion. My neighbors had begun to gather, watching the spectacle from their driveways. Some looked concerned, others curious, but none intervened. 2 police cruisers arrived about 15 minutes later. By then, my garage was half demolished, the roof completely gone, and my motorcycles fully exposed to the brightening morning sky. Officer Jenkins, whom I recognized from community meetings, approached with his partner. "What's going on here?" he asked, taking in the scene with a frown. I immediately launched into an explanation, my words tumbling out faster than I could organize them. "They're destroying my garage without permission. My motorcycles are in there. Look at them, they're about to be ruined." Patricia stepped forward, all business. "Officer, We're the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, and we're conducting a legal demolition of a non-conforming structure after multiple violation notices were ignored. Officer Jenkins looked between us. Do you have permits for this demolition? Patricia hesitated, then said, We have authority under our bylaws. The homeowner signed an agreement acknowledging our right to remedy violations. That doesn't answer my question about permits, Jenkins replied firmly. County ordinance requires demolition permits even for HOA-approved removals. I felt a surge of hope. And I have an appeal pending with the board. The hearing is next Tuesday. Officer Jenkins turned to the excavator operator. Sir, I need you to shut that equipment down immediately until we sort this out. The man looked at Patricia, who nodded reluctantly, and then killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. Now, Jenkins continued, I need to see all documentation from both parties. HOA bylaws, violation notices, appeal paperwork, and most importantly, any demolition permits. While his partner began taking statements from witnesses, Jenkins reviewed the paperwork. My hands shook as I pulled up emails on my phone showing the confirmation of my appeal hearing. Patricia's confident demeanor began to crack as it became clear she couldn't produce a county demolition permit. This is an internal HOA matter, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. We don't need external permits to enforce our own rules. Jenkins shook his head. Madam, that's not correct. County law supersedes HOA bylaws. You need permits for structural demolition, regardless of your covenants. He then walked over to examine my motorcycles, whistling low. These are some serious machines, Mr. Coleman. What's their approximate value? The collection is worth about $120,000, I said, swallowing hard. I've been collecting and restoring them for 15 years. Jenkins nodded, jotting notes in his pad. And was the HOA aware of what was stored in this garage? Absolutely, I said. I specifically mentioned it in my appeal letter. I explained that I needed the extra height for my motorcycle lift and that the cedar siding was sealed with fire retardant coating specifically to protect the vehicles. Patricia's face had gone from confident to concerned. The contents of the garage are irrelevant to the violation, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier authority. After about an hour of gathering information, Officer Jenkins informed us that he was ordering a halt to all demolition activities and would be filing a report. Mr. Coleman, you'll want to get those motorcycles secured somewhere immediately. And Miss Patterson, I suggest you consult with your HOA attorney before taking any further action. This could potentially be criminal property damage. Patricia's face went pale. Criminal. This is a civil matter between the association and a homeowner. Not when you demolish a structure without proper permits, Jenkins replied firmly. That's a county code violation at minimum and potentially criminal destruction of property depending on the circumstances. As the police prepared to leave, Jenkins pulled me aside. Get a tarp over those bikes right away, then get a good lawyer. Document everything, every scratch, every dent. Take hundreds of photos, and don't move anything major until your insurance adjuster sees it. I nodded numbly, already calculating the damage. The garage was half destroyed, leaving my prized possessions exposed. Even if I could save them from further damage, the restoration costs would be enormous. Within an hour, my friend Marcus arrived with his truck and trailer. We carefully documented the condition of each motorcycle with photos and videos, then covered them with padded blankets and loaded them for transport to his climate-controlled workshop across town. I can't believe they did this, man, Marcus said, shaking his head as we secured the last bike. This is straight-up criminal. You know what's worse? I replied, watching Patricia and the other HOA board members who had arrived huddled in conversation across the street. I checked my files while waiting for you. My garage was actually built to code. The height restriction they cited was for sheds, not detached garages. And I had approval for the cedar siding from the previous board 3 years ago, Marcus whistled, so they didn't even have cause. None, and they knew about my appeal hearing. They deliberately jumped the gun. I felt anger building again as I surveyed the destruction. This isn't over. That evening, I met with Abigail Barnes, a property attorney recommended by a colleague. Her office was in downtown Charlotte, and despite the late notice, she agreed to see me after hours. As I showed her the photos and documentation, her expression grew increasingly grim. "This is one of the most egregious HOA overreaches I've seen in my 15 years of practice," she said, reviewing the timeline I had created. "They didn't just fail to follow proper procedure, they actively circumvented it by scheduling demolition before your appeal hearing. And doing it at dawn suggests they were trying to avoid opposition." "Can we sue them?" I asked. "Oh, we're going to do much more than sue," she replied, her voice hardening. "What they did potentially constitutes criminal property damage, trespassing, and possibly even conspiracy. The fact that they knew valuable property was inside and proceeded anyway shows malice." I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but determined. "What's our first step?" "I'm filing for an emergency injunction to prevent any further demolition or interference with your property. Then we're filing a civil suit against the HOA, its board members personally, and the demolition company. Simultaneously, I'll be speaking with the district attorney about pursuing criminal charges." 2 days later, I returned home from work to find Patricia and 2 other board members, Richard Gonzalez and Karen Mills, standing in my driveway, looking distressed. A 4th person, a man in an expensive suit, stood slightly apart. "Lawrence," Patricia called out as I approached, her tone noticeably less imperious than before. "We'd like to talk." "My attorney advised me not to speak with you directly," I replied coldly, moving to walk past them. "Please," she said, her voice almost pleading. "This is Martin Feldstein, our attorney. We want to make this right." I paused, curious despite myself. "Make it right. You destroyed half my garage and nearly wrecked $120,000 worth of motorcycles. How exactly do you plan to make that right?" The lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman, my clients recognize that serious errors were made in the handling of this situation. We'd like to propose a settlement that would cover full restoration of your garage, compensation for any damage to your motorcycles, and additional damages for your inconvenience." I gave a humorless laugh. "I've already filed suit for $500,000 plus punitive damages. My bikes are being assessed by professional appraisers as we speak. Every scratch, every dent is being documented and will be attributed directly to your client's actions." Karen Mills, a woman I'd rarely spoken to before despite living 3 doors down, looked close to tears. "We never meant for this to happen, Lawrence. The board voted for enforcement, but not like this." Richard nodded vigorously. "The demolition was supposed to be a last resort, and only after your appeal was heard. Patricia acted without full board approval for the timing." I looked at Patricia, whose face had gone rigid. "Is that true?" She didn't respond, but her silence was answer enough. "Mr. Coleman," the lawyer continued, "if what my clients are telling me is accurate, this appears to be a case of unauthorized action by certain individuals, not the board as a whole. We're prepared to cooperate fully with your legal team and law enforcement to determine exactly what happened and who bears responsibility." I considered this for a moment. "I'll have my attorney contact you, but let me be clear, someone is going to be held accountable for this. My garage is destroyed, my property was put at risk, and my privacy was violated." As they walked away, I noticed Patricia remaining behind. Once the others were out of earshot, she approached me again. "This wasn't personal, Lawrence," she said quietly. "I was just doing my job enforcing the rules." I stared at her, incredulous. "Not personal? You deliberately scheduled demolition before my appeal hearing at dawn when you knew I'd be asleep. You targeted my garage specifically, knowing what was inside." She shifted uncomfortably. "The board has been under pressure to show results. Property values were starting to slip because of lax enforcement." "Save it for court," I interrupted. Because the police have been asking interesting questions about why you specifically pushed for demolition rather than fines, and why you hired your brother-in-law's company to do the work without getting competitive bids as required in the HOA bylaws. Her face went pale. How did you know about small community, Patricia? People talk. Especially when HOA fees mysteriously increase right after your relatives get lucrative contracts. I walked away, leaving her standing in my driveway. The truth was, I hadn't known for certain about her brother-in-law until she confirmed it with her reaction. But I'd had my suspicions when I recognized the logo on the excavator as belonging to Patterson Construction, a connection I planned to share with my attorney immediately. Over the next few weeks, my case gained momentum. The county prosecutor's office became involved after reviewing the police report and determining that there was sufficient evidence to investigate criminal charges. Meanwhile, my civil case expanded as 3 other homeowners came forward with similar stories of excessive enforcement and suspicious contracting practices. My motorcycles, thankfully, sustained only minor damage, primarily scratches and dust contamination that would require professional detailing and some repainting, but nothing catastrophic. My garage, however, was another story. The structure was deemed unsafe after the partial demolition and would need to be completely rebuilt. 4 months after that fateful morning, I sat in the county courthouse, watching as Patricia Patterson, flanked by her criminal defense attorney, faced the judge for arraignment. The charges against her included criminal property damage, conspiracy, official misconduct, and misappropriation of HOA funds. The investigation had revealed a pattern of steering contracts to friends and family members, with kickbacks flowing back to her personal accounts. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Patricia replied, her voice barely audible. Richard and Karen had struck deals with the prosecutor, agreeing to testify against Patricia in exchange for immunity. Their statements revealed that Patricia had orchestrated the early morning demolitions specifically to avoid opposition, and had falsified board minutes to make it appear that the action had been properly authorized. As the criminal case proceeded, the civil case reached a settlement. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay $120,000 for the damage to my property and motorcycles, plus an additional $75,000 for emotional distress and violation of my rights. The settlement also required the dissolution of the current board and new elections under county supervision. The rebuilding of my garage began in spring. I designed it myself, making sure every detail was not only in compliance with county codes but also aesthetically pleasing. The new structure featured enhanced security, climate control for my motorcycles, and a workshop area where I could continue my restoration projects. 1 year after the demolition, Patricia's criminal trial concluded. The evidence against her was overwhelming, including text messages instructing the demolition crew to get it done before he wakes up, and financial records showing thousands of dollars flowing from her brother-in-law's company to her personal accounts after he received HOA contracts. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. At her sentencing hearing, I was invited to give a victim impact statement. Standing before the court, I faced the woman who had so cavalierly destroyed my property. "Your Honor, when I bought my home in Whispering Pines, I was looking for community. I wanted neighbors who cared about each other and worked together to make our neighborhood a better place. Instead, I found myself living under the rule of someone who saw her position not as a responsibility, but as a source of power and profit. What happened to me wasn't just about a garage or motorcycles, though they represented years of my life and passion. It was about the violation of trust. Miss Patterson didn't just damage my property, she damaged my sense of security in my own home. She showed a blatant disregard for proper procedure, for my rights as a homeowner, and for basic human decency. I don't take pleasure in seeing anyone go to prison. But I do believe there must be consequences when someone abuses their authority so flagrantly and causes such significant harm to others. The judge nodded thoughtfully before addressing Patricia directly. Miss Patterson, you were entrusted with authority by your community, and you abused that trust repeatedly and deliberately. You used your position for personal gain, engaged in nepotism, and when a homeowner dared to challenge you, you retaliated with destruction of property that could have resulted in significant financial loss. Your actions show a disturbing pattern of disregard for proper procedure and basic integrity. Patricia stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. I sentence you to 24 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. You are also barred from serving in any HOA or community governance role for life. As Patricia was led away by court officers, I felt no triumph, only relief that justice had been served and that my community could begin to heal. In the aftermath of the trial, Whispering Pines underwent a transformation. The new HOA board, elected under county supervision, established transparent processes for decision-making and enforcement. Contracts were awarded through competitive bidding, and financial records were made available to all homeowners quarterly. I was approached about joining the new board but declined. Instead, I focused on rebuilding not just my garage, but also relationships with neighbors who had been similarly intimidated by the old regime. The new garage became something of a community gathering spot. On weekends, I'd often have the doors open while working on a motorcycle, and neighbors would stop by with questions about their own home projects or just to chat. Some of the younger residents in the neighborhood showed interest in motorcycle restoration, and I began informally mentoring a few of them. Lucas, a 16-year-old from down the street, became a regular visitor. His parents appreciated that he was developing mechanical skills and learning about responsibility through our work together. When we completed the restoration of a vintage Triumph, a project I'd started before the demolition, and put on hold during the legal battles, the sense of accomplishment on his face made all the hardship worthwhile. 2 years after the demolition, I received an unexpected letter forwarded by my attorney. It was from Patricia, writing from the correctional facility where she was serving her sentence. Mr. Coleman, it began, I've had a lot of time to reflect on my actions and the harm I caused. While nothing I can say will undo the damage or justify what I did, I want you to know that I am truly sorry. Prison has been a humbling experience, forcing me to confront the person I became when given a small measure of authority. I hope that someday, long after my release, I might have the opportunity to make amends to you and the community I betrayed. I set the letter aside, unsure how to feel. Forgiveness wasn't something I was ready to offer, but I acknowledged that her acknowledgement of wrongdoing was at least a step in the right direction. That spring, Whispering Pines held its first community-wide garage sale and block party. Neighbors who had barely spoken during Patricia's reign now worked together, setting up tables and organizing activities for children. My driveway became motorcycle display central, with my restored collection drawing admirers from across the county. Amanda Byad, the new HOA president, made a point of stopping by my display. "Your bikes are incredible, Lawrence," she said, admiring the gleaming chrome and custom paint. "And I have to say, your new garage is the nicest one in the neighborhood, all perfectly up to code, of course." We shared a laugh at that. Amanda represented everything Patricia wasn't: transparent, collaborative, and focused on building community rather than controlling it. "You know," she continued, "we're thinking of updating some of our architectural guidelines, making them clearer and more reasonable. Would you be willing to give some input? We could use someone with your experience." I considered this for a moment. "I'd be happy to help, as long as we focus on guidelines that enhance the community rather than restrict creativity." "That's exactly what we want," she assured me. "Rules that make sense, applied fairly with proper procedures for appeals and exceptions. As the day wound down and neighbors helped each other clean up, I stood in front of my rebuilt garage, bikes safely stored inside, and felt a sense of closure. The ordeal had been painful and costly, but it had also revealed the true character of my neighbors and led to positive change in our community. The restitution money had fully covered the rebuilding costs and repairs to my motorcycles, but the true compensation was seeing justice served and our neighborhood transformed. Whispering Pines was now the community I had hoped for when I first moved in a place where neighbors looked out for each other and worked together for the common good. Later that evening, as I polished the tank of my Harley in the new workshop, I reflected on how a terrible violation had ultimately led to something positive. The demolition of my garage had exposed not just my motorcycles to the elements, but also the corruption that had been festering beneath the surface of our community. The next weekend, I organized a motorcycle ride for charity, inviting riders from across the region to participate. Many of my neighbors joined in, either as riders or volunteers along the route. The event raised thousands for the local children's hospital and became an annual tradition in Whispering Pines. The first ride passed by the correctional facility where Patricia was serving her sentence. I hadn't planned the route that way intentionally, but as our procession of gleaming machines thundered past, I found myself hoping she could hear us not as a taunt, but as a reminder that life in our community was moving forward, stronger than before. 3 years after the demolition, I received notice that Patricia was being released on parole. My attorney forwarded the information as a courtesy, though there was no reason for concern. Her probation terms prohibited her from returning to Whispering Pines or contacting any former residents. That same week, I completed work on a commemorative motorcycle build, a custom cafe racer, with details that subtly told the story of destruction and rebuilding. The tank featured an airbrushed phoenix rising from rubble, and hidden in the detailing were timestamps. 5:47 a.m. when I awoke to the demolition, and 3:15 p.m. when the verdict was read. I entered it in a prestigious custom bike show in Charlotte and took first place in my category. The local newspaper ran a feature on the bike and my story, which led to interviews with several motorcycle magazines. My experience became something of a cautionary tale in HOA governance circles, cited in training sessions for new board members as an example of how not to handle enforcement. The final chapter of my rebuilding came when I hosted an open house for my completed garage workshop. Neighbors, fellow motorcycle enthusiasts, and even Officer Jenkins and Abigail Barnes attended. The structure that rose from the rubble of Patricia's vindictive action was better than its predecessor in every way, more functional, more beautiful, and built with a deeper appreciation for the security it represented. As guests admired the space and the motorcycles within it, Amanda pulled me aside. "The county supervisor wants to talk to you. They're forming a task force to review HOA regulations and recommend reforms. Your case has become something of a catalyst for change." I agreed to participate, seeing it as an opportunity to help prevent others from experiencing what I had endured. The task force's work eventually led to significant changes in county ordinances governing homeowners associations, including stricter oversight of enforcement actions, mandatory training for board members, and enhanced protections for homeowners facing disputes. 5 years after that early morning when I ran barefoot across my lawn to confront an excavator destroying my garage, I stood in the driveway of my home in Whispering Pines and realized how completely things had changed. The neighborhood had transformed from a place of fear and control to one of cooperation and respect. My garage and motorcycles were restored, better than before. The $120,000 restitution had covered the physical losses, but the true compensation was in seeing justice served and positive change emerge from adversity. Patricia served her full 24 months, with no time off for good behavior due to disciplinary issues while incarcerated. Upon release, she moved to another state, her reputation and career permanently damaged by her actions and the subsequent criminal record. The other board members who had cooperated with the investigation had moved on as well, some relocating, others simply fading into the background of community life. The Phoenix Cafe Racer, as I'd named my commemorative build, became something of a local legend. I occasionally took it to schools and community events, using it as a teaching tool about standing up for your rights and the importance of ethical leadership. Young people were particularly drawn to the story behind it, and more than a few were inspired to study law or public administration as a result. One afternoon, as I was returning from a ride on the winding roads of the Blue Ridge Mountains, I pulled into my driveway and paused to admire my home. The garage doors were open, revealing the gleaming machines inside. The structure itself had become something of a showcase, with neighbors often bringing visitors by to see it. Lucas, now in college studying mechanical engineering, was working on his own motorcycle project in the space I had allocated for mentoring. He waved as I pulled in, his hands covered in grease, a huge grin on his face. "Got it running," he called out as I removed my helmet. "First try." I walked over to inspect his work, a 1980s Honda CB 750 he'd purchased with savings from his summer job, gradually restoring it with my guidance and tools. "Clean work," I said, genuinely impressed by the transformation. "You've got a real talent for this." "Learned from the best," he replied. And the best garage in 3 counties doesn't hurt. We shared a laugh at that. The garage that had once been the center of so much conflict and pain had become a place of learning, creativity, and community. The motorcycles that had nearly been destroyed were now inspirations for a new generation of enthusiasts. Later that evening, I received an email from the county supervisor. The HOA reform measures we had helped develop were being adapted by other counties across the state, with our case study used as evidence of the need for change. There was talk of state-level legislation that would establish minimum standards for HOA governance and homeowner protections. As I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the machines I loved and the space I had fought to rebuild, I reflected on how a simple violation notice had spiraled into destruction, then legal battles, then imprisonment, and finally, reform and renewal. The $120,000 restitution had restored my property, but the true value was in the justice that had been served and the positive changes that had emerged from the ordeal. The motorcycles gleamed under the workshop lights, each one telling part of my story, the vintage Honda that had survived the demolition with only minor scratches, the Ducati whose custom paint had been restored to perfection, the Harley that had become my daily rider through the legal battles, and the Phoenix Cafe Racer that commemorated the entire journey. Outside, Whispering Pines was quiet, peaceful. Neighbors walked their dogs or chatted in driveways, free from the oppressive regime that had once governed our community with threats and intimidation. Children played in yards without parents worrying about violation notices for toys left out. My phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. "Board meeting canceled, not enough agenda items. First time in HOA history. Progress." I smiled, set the phone aside, and picked up a polishing cloth. As I worked the soft fabric over chrome and paint, I thought about Patricia, sitting in her cell as my case worked its way through the courts. I wondered if she ever truly understood the damage she had caused, or if she merely regretted getting caught. In the end, it didn't really matter. What mattered was that justice had been served, restitution had been made, and our community had healed and grown stronger. The garage that rose from the rubble was more than just a structure, it was a testament to perseverance, and the power of standing up for what's right, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. And as for my motorcycles, they continued to be my passion, my creative outlet, And now, unexpectedly, a vehicle for positive change in a community that had found its way from conflict to cooperation.